Friends, it's a pleasure for me to introduce my brother Emmanuel Denguessi to you. I got to know Emmanuel as a member of the Executive Minister Search Task Group, and we've been working for about the last 15 months or so, and we're almost nearing the completion of our task, and it's been a great pleasure for me to get to know Emmanuel there. He has a broad range of work experience in several industries, including athletics, police forces, food, construction, healthcare, and education. He attended high school in Cameroon and went on to obtain a certificate in life coaching there. He went on as well to obtain a diploma in biblical studies and a bachelor's degree in caregiving and counseling at Columbia Bible College. So he's a CBC grad. Okay, and I thought that would produce a bit of a response, but that's fine. So he graduated with a master's degree in organizational leadership from Trinity Western University, and as well as a certificate in adult education, academic coaching, and facilitation. He was recognized for his contribution with the Cameroonian national volleyball team winning the 2001 Africa Cup of Nations. Yeah. And elevated to the rank of the Knight of the Order of Valor of the Cameroonian Republic. He was also recognized in 2018 as the Men's Volleyball Coach of the Year in British Columbia as part of the Canada Westpac Conference. He's also a published author, has authored 2 books and co-authored another one, as well as having contributed to a book on spirituality by our very own Gareth Brand. He has also successfully developed and implemented a reconciliation process in faith-based organizations. And currently, Emmanuel is part-time faculty and academic facilitator at Trinity Western University. He's also the council chair of Emmanuel Mennonite Church. I don't know where he gets the time, but that's fine, in Abbotsford, and as I mentioned, a fellow member of the Executive Minister Search Task Group. Emmanuel, welcome. Blessings, brother.
Good morning. Being here this morning warmed my heart because our congregation went through a process that you might already have gone through, who led to you being able to acknowledge the land in which you are worshiping. So we have been in the mix of that. Last June, the congregation agreed to exercise that as a part of our worship, but it came with a cost. So our congregation is painfully living the aftermath of that, but by seeing that a church can survive after those discussions, those discernment, it is a hope. It is a hope for me as a council church. So thank you very much, and thank you for your faithfulness to the body of Christ. For those, and for you, and for showing us that it is possible to continue. The second thing that I want to acknowledge here is, as a French speaker, I tend to forget that there are languages where pronunciation is a key part of meaning. Therefore, if you ask yourself this morning, what does it just say? Please, I am asking for your indulgence. I'm still working out the nitty and gritty of the language of Shakespeare. So I'm training my tongue to articulate very well word in English. So thank you for your indulgence. In 2002, the late Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Golden Jubilee. It marked her 50th years of reign as a queen of a territory including 14 countries. The celebration lasted a little more than a month, starting by a goodwill trip where she visited part of her kingdom and reached its peak on the first week of June with a weekend celebration in London. According to Wikipedia, 20 million of people applied for tickets to participate to the celebration. But only a little more than 12,000 were lucky enough to witness the live symphony, the parades displaying the majesty of Queen Elizabeth II in a golden jubilee, her 50th year of reign. Now, you might ask yourself, why am I speaking about Elizabeth II on a Sunday in the house of the Lord? Well, because the number 50 and the word Jubilee have biblical significance. They are associated with the greatest socio-economic policy idea ever suggested in the history of humankind. And it is right in the Bible. Your church has been asking for quite a while, what is the good news? So today my goal is to argue that the Jubilee legislation is the foundation of the gospel in practice, the good news. And its principles are not limited by time. And perhaps it is the response to some of the crises all our churches are facing these days. The passage we already read until verse 12, where it goes to 53. So I would encourage you in your own time to go and read the rest. But the focus of the biblical idea of the year of Jubilee, or the year of the Lord, as it has come to be known, were never about a person, as in the case of the British monarchy, but liberty, restoration for the land, economical restoration, and identity restoration for the benefit of the family. Now, a theologian called C.J. Wright argues that the Jubilee was a socio-economical institution centered around the family. In other words, every social economical consideration was made knowing that the families should be the primary beneficiary. Now, our idea of family is sometimes narrow, but when Israel think about family, they were thinking about three categories: the tribe, Judah, Ephraim, Manasseh; the clan; then you had the household. The land was the most valuable commodity at all levels of the family ecosystem, because it was from the land that everything derived. Therefore, Israel, before entering the Promised Land, was called to apply God's social economic policy in the new land. Now, the policy were anchored or based on the four assumptions. First one, God's on the land. Therefore, Israel was supposed to be the steward and should have put their trust in the Lord. And from there derived the principle of ownership. So as such, an Israelite couldn't sell the land permanently. The land wasn't supposed to be sold permanently because it was assumingly God's property. And because it was the resources, God's idea for the Israelites was for them to assume that resources are not what attach you from God, but it's God who's giving that to you, and you become a good steward. And that led to a practice of faithfulness. that we have come to call the Sabbath, or the sabbatical years and the year of Jubilee. The 7th day, God rested. The 7th year, the land was supposed to rest. The 49th year, there were sabbatical years, who led to the year of Jubilee. Now I can think about the farmer asking, but how am I going to eat? Am I going to feed my family? But that's where God challenged his people to say, I am going to provide to you as I did in the wilderness. I can give you the manna. That's God's idea for the Israelites on the year of Jubilee. 2 years without working on the land, but for you to believe that God would provide. Your resources, your land are mine. You are steward, and I will be your God. The second assumption is that we are not living in a perfect world. Therefore, unfortunate situations happen. And that leads us to the principle of compassion or empathy. So Israel's household did not have equal resources. When they came out from Egypt, some came with cattle, gold, and silver, but others did not. The family sizes were not also the same. Some had many children, and others not. And for those in farming, know that the number of human resources affect your productivity. So let's take an example. A household with less members and less bargaining power have to sell some of their property to hire workers. And if the harvest season was not good, they may not have sufficient means to hire workers for the next season. What do? They will sell their entire property or become hire workers for their relatives or the stranger living among them. And in some extreme cases, they will sell themselves into slavery. Now, another thing to consider is the death of a male family member, because Israel was a patriarchal culture. And that hit me, because I think 30 years or 40 years ago in Cameroon, we were not far away from that reality. My dad went to study to Germany. He was one of the first engineers in Cameroon. When he came back, he was also the oldest son of a tribal chief. So as a result of that, he has the responsibility of the family. And he was the one, with his salary, he was sustaining the family. So we had in our home a lot of uncles, cousins, and relatives coming and enjoying the life. But he passed away in 2008. It meant also that his salary was cut. A house full became a house empty. And we find ourselves with my mom and my brother. My mom was going in the morning to work because she didn't have a job. She didn't have a constant salary, and when my dad left, she wasn't working. But she had to go out to work and at 8 a.m. and come back around 10 a.m. And we were waiting because her coming back home meant our first meal. We didn't have any more running water. We couldn't invite our friend at home because it was smelly. We were selling our textbooks, in order to buy a bucket of rice. And we put palm oil, and that was our meal. Patriarchal culture. That's something I live. And in the Bible, I address that from the perspective of the Israelites. When in the case of Ruth and Naomi, if you are acquainted with the book, when the man died, Naomi became an outcast. So unfortunate situation happened. The legislation understand that. The third assumption of the Jubilee idea is that each individual Israelite was God's children, therefore, brothers and sisters. And that's what I call or trigger the principle of brotherhood or sisterhood. So what it meant, if you sold your property to someone else, your closest relative was supposed to come and redeem it. Your relative has then until the year of the Jubilee to own the land. But if before that you had the possibility to work and gather the money, you could redeem that land. But in the case that you cannot, you will have to wait for the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee was an equalizer. The further you were from the year of Jubilee, the highest the price of your land, your property will cost in that case. The closest you were from the year of Jubilee, the lower the price of the property would cost. So Israel was God's children, and every member of the Israelite community were supposed to be brothers and sisters. So the fourth assumption is that God is still part of the human equation through his constant act of redemption. Therefore, every single individual Israelite should have redeemed each other. So God has redeemed Israel from servitude and granted them freedom of prosperity to all when they came out from Egypt. So Israel should do the same to one another. So what it meant is that if your relatives sold themselves into slavery, you had the obligation to go and redeem them. If not, on the 50th year, the year of Jubilee, they regain their liberty. And if you redeem them and they are hire worker for you, you have to treat them with all the dignity available to all Israelites. So therefore, in the kingdom of God, every socio-economical interaction was to take in consideration the year of Jubilee. So if you were an Israelite and decided to be in the same mind of God as Paul reminds us, you would have enjoyed the excitement of the oppressed, the poor, the slave, knowing that at least once in their lifetime, they will experience dignity. Their mistake or misfortune may not seal the fate of their children forever. If they work hard enough, they could buy their freedom back and reclaim their property. Or even better, a relative could come and say, I sponsored you. So even if all that is not possible, in the year of Jubilee, it was a reset button. A reset button, a return to the Garden of Eden, where human beings lived in harmony with God, with one another, and with all creation. But if your philosophy of life was power and control, you may not have liked the year of Jubilee. That's my property. That's my land. You are my servant. I pay with my money. But that's also the antithesis of the mind of God for his people. Some theologians have argued that the Jubilee idea was a part of the Old Testament, therefore does not apply to the New Testament people, which we are. Others went further, suggesting that Leviticus 25 is an added test of the Hebraic law done by priests during the Babylonian exile. For the people holding this view, Levite priests were concerned with land ownership in the eventuality of a return to Palestine. Some simply say that the socio-economical system during that time were only based on agriculture, therefore should not apply to modern-day civilization. They have some point. We need to grant it that. But even though there is no account in the Bible of Israel observing the Jubilee, there are accounts in the Bible, in the biblical narrative, about what resulted from observing or not observing the Jubilee principles. The writer of the book of Chronicles inferred that the Babylonian exile resulted from Israel's failure to give a rest to the land, which implied a lack of trust to Yahweh. Isaiah confronted the people about their spiritual practices, stating that in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit all your laborers. Then the prophet continues by further exposing the people, inviting them to loose the bond of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. Those are Jubilee language. Jesus repeated the words of the prophet Isaiah in what scholars say was the closest he came to a mission statement, thus opening the Jubilee legislation idea, the good news to all nations. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, he said, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of the sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. But Jesus did not only say those words, he lived out those words. The example of Zacchaeus, a tax collector who assumedly was an Israelite rejected by his people because of his profession. Zacchaeus responded by pledging to redistribute the money he took from the people, giving back what he had taken. Furthermore, Luke explained in chapter 7 of his book that Jesus was dining in the house of a Pharisee. Jesus would have loved Mennonite churches, always dining. And all of a sudden, a woman who was identified as a prostitute came and sobbed, get into the feet of Jesus, clean her feet with her tears. But the result is that she gained back her dignity. Her sin was forgiven. Or in other words, her debt was forgiven. In the book of Acts, we are told that the apostles were helping each other meet their needs. And brother and sister, if there is a book that I want you to take a time and read, it's the letter of Paul to Philemon, if you want to understand the Jubilee legislation. It's a short book. You can even memorize that if you have time. What happened in that book? Philemon, a believer, a good believer, who has 7, and this time they were called slaves, have one of them flee. We suggest that Onesimus, which was the slave, have done something bad. But in his journey outside the house of Philemon, he encountered Paul. And encountering Paul meant encountering Jesus too. And Paul take the pen and write to Philemon and say, I am sending you back Onesimus, but not in the way that he left. I am sending you your brother. Not anymore a slave, but a brother. That's the Jubilee. That's the good news. But it didn't stop there. Some of us, the Mennonite network have sponsored people that were suffering in the Ukraine in the 80s, in the end of the 19th century. And then came MCC. And what did MCC did? They sponsor oppressed people from war zone to give them a better life in Canada. Those people were known as good farmers, and they were given land here either by the government or other network, or sold at cheap price, which started a cycle of prosperity from those former refugees. So all the latter fulfill the concept of Jubilee. And even if it is an ancient legislation, its principle, ownership, God owns the land, brotherhood and sisterhood, we all God's children, therefore brother and sister and relative. Empathy and compassion, we are not perfect, therefore some will make significant mistake. The principle of redemption. We all long for redemption from one another because God has been redeeming us every day of our life. Those are not bound by time. They are still part of our life. God is calling us to have that in the center, in the forefront of our minds every single day as we interact with each other. So, the question for us today is, how do we live out the Jubilee principle as a Christian community on November the 20th at Peace Mennonite Church? Well, there are many angles we could take. We can look at it from our individual and collective action toward climate change. We could address that from a real estate perspective or from an unceded territory point of view. From a global perspective, you can look at state debt forgiveness, forgiving the debt of poor country and so on. Or at from the perspective of the exploitation of land from African native in the Congo for mineral extraction necessary to build our computer, cell phone, and so on. There's a lot of ways we can apply that. But sometimes those ways are out there, perhaps even too big, out of reach. That's what I want to leave you with a thought experiment. Naturally, as a teacher, that's what I do with my students. Something which might be very close to us as a Christian community. So a young family, let's call them the Jones. And I'm sorry if there is a Jones family here. That wasn't my purpose. Recently graduated from UBC, succeeded to have jobs with a combined income of $100,000 annually. 2 years after they married, they bought a condo in Richmond with a mortgage of $3,000, let's say. God blessed them with a child, and because they believe in multiplication, they found that they were expecting the second child, then the third. So they make a decision that one of them needs to stay at home with the children. The outcome of that decision is that they rely now on one income. In addition, they are repaying student loans acquired for their education. And to not forfeit their obligation and to maintain a decent lifestyle, the working spouse decides to take a second job so that they can survive the expensive life in the Vancouver area. But the added job happened during nighttime and on the weekend. Consequently, the working spouse cannot attend church anymore with family. He or she cannot read anymore with the children. And the stay-at-home parent, tired because of the hard-working demand of the household management during the day, wants to have someone to talk to at night, but do not find anyone. As time passes, tension builds in the household, and after 6 years of marriage, they are on the brink of divorce. How do we save that couple? How do we help that couple? They have become like the vulnerable Israelites, under the yoke of financial oppression and the prison of debt. How do we exercise God's social economic policy toward them? So let's imagine that MCC and MCBC and their affiliate churches, through multiple fundraising campaigns, raise funds dedicated to help families such as those to repay the mortgage or the student loan. The person will apply or the family will apply and have a repayment plan for 49 years and forgiven at the 50th years without interest. Let's imagine that every church goes solar and sell the surplus of the hydro to receive money so that families like the Jones could afford childcare. Let's imagine that the Mennonite network consider refinancing their property and invest into becoming affordable housing so that families like this can own property again at a lower rate. Let's imagine that us, Christian community, start an advocacy campaign destined to pressure the government to forgive student loans. Doing so will avoid the financial oppression that this type of family experience, the forced exile caused by economical pressure, taking away parents from their children. It will restore the dignity of having somewhere to stay and eliminate the stigma of being a part of the divorce statistic that we experience in the Christian world. So, if we choose to adopt the Jubilee mindset and live out its principle, then the sound we will hear coming from our churches won't be the sound of ram's horn, but from many families, young and old, confessing that they have seen and tasted the goodness of the Lord through his church. And the gospel of Jesus Christ will be once more good news to the world. Amen.